voice of discovery and sharing.
Monday Morning Matters.
Perspective from Southeast Asia.
Hey, good morning. This is Arlene. You're listening to Durian ASEAN, the voice of discovery and sharing. On our Monday Morning Matters, we will discuss on China's energy vision in Asia. With me is Dr. Philip Andrews Speed, Principal Fellow and Head of the Energy Studies Institute, National University of Singapore. And hi, how are you?
Thank you. Good morning, Arlene. Very well, thank you.
Yes, good morning. And before we talk about the topic on China's energy vision, perhaps you can share about your background and your research focus.
Well, originally I trained as a geologist. I was in the international mining industry and then the international oil industry, and I worked for an international oil company in China in the early 90s. Which is when I discovered that the politics of oil and energy was much more important and much more interesting than the rocks. So I retrained in energy law and policy in the United Kingdom and became an academic, focusing on energy and resource governance initially in China and then in the wider Asian region. And I'm now in Singapore, continuing my research on energy governance in Asia.
Mm-hmm. When China started to become one of the biggest consumer on commercial energy, especially coal and oil?
Well, I mean, it's, the economy in China has been growing, since liberation in 1949, and in 1993 it became a net importer of oil. I mean, never forget that China has a lot of mineral and energy resources.
Mm-hmm.
It has a lot of coal, has a lot of oil, and quite a lot of gas. So China was one of the biggest producers of oil, but its demand was growing so fast it became a net importer in 1993, and it really sort of arrived on the international stage in the years 2003 onwards as the economy grew very fast and the energy demand way outstripped domestic supply.
I see. And with China now preparing itself become the largest economy in the world, what is China's new normal?
I think it's a bit difficult to tell. It's difficult to tell for two reasons. First, because it is changing trying to change from being a highly energy-intensive, heavy industry-based economy to a more balanced economy where light industry and the service sector play a much more important role. So it's in that transition. So we don't know where that will sort of level out. Secondly, the statistics are so bad that we don't know whether economic growth this year, for example, is 7% or so, as the government says, or maybe 5% or so, as some people say, or maybe even 3 or 4%, as a few people say.
Why is that so?
Why are the statistics bad? I mean, statistics in China always are a problem because you have it's a huge country with more than 30 provinces, which are the major economic governance units, as well as many subdivisions below that. So just gathering all that data reliably is difficult. But secondly, there is false reporting all the way up the chain because officials are set targets and they report that they have achieved their targets. And this is a long-standing problem. It's not new. But it means that it's always difficult to assess economic growth reliably and energy consumption reliably.
Well, currently China is facing economic slowdown and also with the lower oil prices. How does this impact the energy sector in China, especially in terms of its key energy consumption?
Well, certainly with the economic slowdown and the apparent reduction of the energy-intensive industries, heavy industries, then yes, demand, the consumption of energy in China has slowed down. The rate of increase has slowed remarkably. There's only a small increase in electricity use. Coal consumption may have fallen marginally in 2014. There's too much gas being produced and available, so they're having to shut down gas fields. Oil imports are slowing, except for the fact that they're using some of the oil imports to put in their strategic storage. So yes, that appears to have been a dramatic change on China's energy consumption.
And what is China doing right now?
Sorry, what's it doing with respect to what?
What is doing right now to address the economic slowdown and the lower oil prices in terms of trying to make its energy sector more robust?
Well, I think, on the one hand, it's worried about the economic slowdown because if it slows down too much, there'll be lots of unemployment. So the government is finding ways to put more money into the economy through the banks by changing the rules for the banks. And yes, there's a lot of talk about reforming the energy companies and changing the pricing systems for energy, but there have been no major steps taken so far, though there have been quite a lot of talk.
Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, Asia is also facing the exact same situation like China, especially countries in Asia that are relying quite heavily on China's economy. How does this really impact Asia as a whole when it comes to its energy sector as well?
I think there are two dimensions here. One, with China needing less energy, it is importing less energy. So those countries that were supplying coal, oil, and natural gas to China find that China doesn't need as much, particularly coal, and to a lesser extent natural gas. So in this region, Australia has a real problem, and Indonesia also will find itself, there'll be less need for its gas and its coal.
And these two countries are the biggest importer of coal to China.
The biggest exporters of coal to China.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think on the other side, if one is looking at China's energy companies coming out into the world, investing in the world, with low energy prices, they too are struggling. The profits of the oil companies, for example, have dropped dramatically in China as they have everywhere. Therefore, the amount of capital to spend on the energy projects around the world, including in Asia, is less than it was 3 or 4 years ago. So certainly in the short term, we're seeing less investment by China's energy companies in other Asian countries.
We'll take one short break. When we return, we'll discuss further on China's One Belt and One Road strategy.
You're now listening to Durian ASEAN, the voice of discovery and sharing.
Monday Morning Matters. Perspective from Southeast Asia.
Hey, you're still with me, Arlene, and of course Dr. Philip Andrew Speed on the China's energy vision in Asia. So continuing our discussion, Dr. Philip, I want to know more about China's One Belt, One Road, Silk Road strategy. What is it all about?
Well, it was announced 2 years ago in September 2013. It has two elements. It has the overland Silk Road economic belt linking Europe and Asia, and a maritime Silk Road that goes along the South China Sea, through the Indian Ocean, and also a bit east into the South Pacific. So it is geographically huge in physical scope, But again, I call it really a strategic vision rather than a strategy, because even 2 years since it was first developed, it's poorly defined exactly what it will involve. So I think one should see it as a 35-year or more vision, and some people have said that actually this is nothing startlingly new. It's just concretizing something that has been happening anyway, from the Chinese point of view, over the last 10 or 15 years.
Mm-hmm. There's no clear policy or deadline on the One Belt, One Road or strategy plan or strategy vision.
No, there's no deadline. There's no specific programs being developed. However, that being said, there is a sort of an economic rationale, which is to, diversify and enhance the capacity of routes to bring energy, minerals and other stuff to China. So it's, building transportation infrastructure to bring stuff to China and to take stuff out of China. It's also to help support China's economy by using excess industrial capacity, people, factories and stuff to build this infrastructure across Asia. It will give China access in principle to new markets for their technologies, high-speed rail, aviation, telecommunications, etc., boosting exports, building international value chains, etc. So behind it, there is a relatively clear economic objective, but exactly how each is going to play out in each region has not been defined.
Mm-hmm. It's pretty romantic and ambitious if you just, listen to how you explain about the One Belt, One Road ambition. But when it comes to the impact that China wants, it wants to be the world foremost economy in the world, or is it more than that?
I think it's not saying so much they will at some stage be the biggest economy in the world. I think it's saying we want to be integrated. And we want to be integrated both by sea and by land. And so, there's an unbeatable logic to it. But I think China's governments over the decades have this willingness and enthusiasm for rhetoric. And this is part of it. And so I think we need to look below the rhetoric and see what is happening. And my understanding, talking to people, is there is sort of now One Belt, One Road fever in China as local governments and companies and even academics try and get projects that will feed into One Belt, One Road and therefore be financially and politically supported by this vision. But as I say, this process is at very early stages and we don't know what's going to come out.
So through this vision of One Belt, One Road, what China has planned for its energy sector domination in Asia? What is its grand scheme?
Looking at energy, I think at first we need to say that as we look to the future, I think energy will pay progressively less share in China's international engagements, economic engagements. It has been very important in the last 10 or 15 years. Already in 2014, China's overseas investment in mining and energy fell in absolute terms and in proportion to overall economic engagement. So I think we've got other sectors, technology, agribusiness, construction, real estate, finance. These things are growing rapidly. So I don't think energy will necessarily be at the core of One Belt, One Road, though it will be an important part. Now, clearly from China's point of view at the moment, the really important thing, assuming the economy picks up again, is to bring energy into China. So I think Central Asia and to a lesser extent Russia and obviously the Middle East will be the energy focal areas from the point of view of investment and bringing energy into China.
Mm-hmm. Any specific energy investment that China is looking at?
At the moment, we don't know, but they're heavily engaged in the Middle East, which of course is very unstable now. Central Asia is a little nearer and more stable, so one would expect to see more there. Russia, China and Russia are slowly getting closer together on the energy scene. China wants to invest in Russia, and these deals are coming through, but very slowly.
What about Southeast Asia?
I think Southeast Asia, is not one of the world's great sources of primary fossil energies.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Indonesia has coal and has been exporting to China. It has gas and has been exporting to China. Myanmar is coming onto the scene slowly. So yes, I'm sure there will continue to be Chinese companies investing in oil, gas and coal in Southeast Asia, and that Southeast Asian countries with these resources will be exporting to China. But I don't necessarily see them as being the primary focus for the what would be the Maritime Silk Road strategy. I think there the key energy element is the sea lane security.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to coal consumption, China's consumption has declined year after year. When it comes to China's global focus on investing in energy sector, do you see China's moving from coal towards other forms of energy investment?
Let's go back. China's coal consumption dropped marginally last year, but that's the first time for a long time. So China's coal consumption will continue to grow for a few years, but albeit more slowly. Yes, so from that point of view, China's imports of coal unlikely to grow rapidly, and the incentive for China's energy companies to invest overseas in coal is also less, at least from the point of view of bringing that coal back to China. You then need to say, are these coal companies going to invest overseas in order just to make money, to sell coal, for example, to India, where coal demand is growing? So there's a sort of the strategic need to take coal back to China will reduce. The opportunity to make money by digging up coal in different parts of the world and selling it to India and other countries may still exist.
Mm-hmm. What is the current energy policy for China towards Asia? Is there like a common standard or common ground on it?
I think there are two elements to its sort of international Asian energy strategy. One is getting energy from Asia back to China. And there, in the last few years, we've seen this preference for building pipelines, oil and gas pipelines from Central Asia, through and from Myanmar, and from Russia. So that has been, as it were, strategic investments in pipelines to bring oil and gas to China to avoid total dependence on the sea lanes. However, the corporate investment by China's energy companies in oil, gas and coal deposits, these decisions are taken mainly, though not entirely, by the companies themselves. And often this oil and gas and coal is not sent back to China. It is sold on international markets.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we got the national government strategy to, yes, we want to bring this Asian energy in. We will help transport it into China, separate from the corporate strategies, which are based on internationalization. We need to invest overseas and grow and sell onto the markets.
Mm-hmm. Is the ASEAN Investment Infrastructure Bank part of China's focus on the energy in Asia?
I think it will be. It will be part of the equation. I mean, ASEAN has huge infrastructure investment needs, and the International Energy Agency 2 years ago estimated that $2 trillion needed to be spent in the next 20 years on energy infrastructure alone in ASEAN. So somebody has to do that, and you then say, well, who has the money? Mm-hmm. And obviously China, through various forms, is one source of that money. But if I'm looking out from China, I wouldn't see Southeast Asia as being at the top priority of energy investment, but it's clearly going to be there.
Mm-hmm. When you say Southeast Asia, that means even Indonesia won't be at the top of China's energy top 10.
Certainly no. I mean, it's got useful coal deposits, useful gas deposits, but these are not world class. Mm-hmm. This is not the Middle East. It's not Central Asia. So yes, people can make money from it. But even the coal deposits, you want big coal, that's Australia. Mm-hmm. So from the point of view of being suppliers of energy to China, as Southeast Asia, ASEAN, it's there, but it's not right at the top of the list.
I see. We'll take another one short break. When we return, we'll discuss more on the challenges that is facing China in terms of its energy investment in the Asia market, as well as China's focus on renewable energy.
You're now listening to Durian ASEAN, the voice of discovery and sharing.
Monday Morning Matters.
Perspectives
from Southeast Asia.
Welcome back to the Monday Morning Matters with me, Arlene, of course, discussing on China's energy vision in Asia with Dr. Philip Andrews Speed. Hey, hello there.
Yes, I'm with you still. Thank you.
Yeah. So, earlier on, we discussed a lot about the One Belt, One Road, strategic ambition and China's focus on Asia in terms of its energy sector. But I want to know, what are the challenges that China will be or is currently facing in terms of its energy investment in the Asia markets?
I think one of the problems in much of Asia, but not all of Asia, is that the investment conditions are not very good. Mm-hmm. I mean, we can start in the Middle East, where we have enough civil wars to cope with, and that tells you that investing in some countries there is difficult. Iran clearly is now coming back into play, but that will be slow, I think.
So politics play a huge part in terms of how smooth the investment would be.
Yes, I mean, politics in two ways. One, in physical security, and the other is in sort of non-security investment risk. And I think if we come to Southeast Asia, I think, I've talked to many people who said, yeah, there are lots of projects, but very few of them are bankable. And that means that either the commercial or legal risk is too high, or that the prices that are paid for energy are too low, mm-hmm. or other sort of regulatory or administrative issues. And I think particularly in Southeast Asia, this is the big problem. In Central Asia, it's less of a problem, and that's why so many projects involving China have gone ahead in Central Asia. Southeast Asia, it's how confident are you when you invest that you will get your money back? And this is affecting Chinese investors as well as investors from other parts of the world.
Mm-hmm. I mean, energy is a high-risk investment. What about other players, for example, the U.S.?
Well, I think, as I say, companies, if we set aside the sudden drop in energy prices, and even if we go back 2 years when energy prices were higher, it was still difficult to be confident in most Southeast Asian countries that if you invested in oil, gas, or electricity, or coal, that you would get your money back because of the way that energy is governed in this region, and particularly the relatively low prices that are paid for energy.
Mm-hmm. Right now, is China dominating the global energy market?
No. I mean, there's been a lot of talk and writing by academics such as myself and policy people about China's energy companies going out across the world, but they are still, relatively small players. They are new. Sorry, the companies are big, but if you add up the total aggregate investment compared to the existing investment of international oil companies, then China is not the big player. It is getting bigger, but it's still only a moderate-sized player because they are latecomers.
Mm-hmm. One of the biggest criticism towards China's energy sector is the pollution, especially air pollution. Is China doing anything to address this?
Yes, and I mean it's doing two types of thing. One, the structure of the economy is changing anyway, as we've discussed, so that the amount of energy used per GDP output is falling, and as we've discussed, the proportion of coal in the energy mix, the proportion of coal is falling. So this sort of background stuff in the economy happening anyway, and as well as that, China is undertaking different environmental steps to make sure that what coal is used more cleanly. For example, in power stations, they have new appliances to remove the sulfur and the dust, and steel plants are more efficient and cleaner. So there's sort of general stuff happening in the economy and the energy mix on the one hand, and specific measures on clean coal, clean cars that are also happening. But this takes a long time to come to fruition. This is not something that can be achieved in 2 years. This is a 10, 15-year program.
But is China really taking this seriously? Is China committed towards focusing more on cleaner energy?
Yes, absolutely. And this has got nothing to do with climate change. It's got everything to do with its citizens hating the dirty air and the illnesses and costs that arise from that.
Mm-hmm. So when it comes to renewable energy, is China also, trying to play around with the sector as well?
Yes, I mean, in the last 4 or 5 years, the government has placed huge emphasis on renewable energy. Let's just talk about solar and wind in this heading of renewable. So as we've seen, it put a huge amount of financial support behind the manufacturing industry, the companies that make the appliances, the wind turbines and the solar panels. This has led not only to a very rapid growth in the deployment of solar and wind energy in China, but has led, particularly in the case of solar, to the spread of relatively cheap solar PV technology across the world. Mm-hmm. So this is a very high priority, but again, China's energy sector is so huge that even an apparently very large amount of wind and solar PV is still small in the big picture of China, but it is growing. And again, this is a 10, 15, 20-year program that is showing results, but the real impact is down the road.
Mm-hmm. What about hydroelectricity? Because we see that China has been investing quite a bit more in Southeast Asia and in building dams.
Yes, I mean, hydroelectricity has been important in China, since liberation in 1949, because they have these huge rivers. And it continues to be important and produces about nearly 20% of the country's electricity. Mm-hmm. It appears that construction of dams is necessarily slowing down in China because most of the big rivers have already been dammed.
I see.
So the companies that do the construction are now moving out to make money elsewhere, and where better to start than near at home in continental Southeast Asia, in the Mekong River Basin area, and in Myanmar. Now, not all of these projects are actual Chinese investment. Many of them, the investment comes from the government or from other companies or from development banks. But so in many cases, the construction companies are just undertaking construction contracts for the host governments. But yes, the Chinese are heavily engaged in Southeast Asia's hydro sector.
And how would China's energy ambition impact Asia in the coming decade? I know this is quite a vast question to this, but if you could focus a few areas, what are the areas that China would excel or would impact Asia?
I think, the oil and gas sector, it's been doing this for many years, and that will grow. And I think one thing to watch that will be interesting and is not clear yet is nuclear power. China is not only the fastest growing nuclear power sector in the world, but its companies want to invest overseas, along with the Russian, the Korean, the Japanese companies. So I think we should expect to see China's nuclear energy companies looking for contracts around Asia, and I think this is new. They're already working in Pakistan. They're probably going to build something in the United Kingdom, for example. So that is something that if Southeast Asian governments decide to go nuclear, then you should expect China trying to get some of these contracts.
I see.
On the renewable energy sector, yes, one would expect to see, if not investment, then the manufacturing technologies of China in solar, in wind, and maybe in small-scale hydro, those technologies spreading across the region.
Would there be a reduction or a huge reduction in terms of non-renewable energy like coal and oil investment?
I think that it depends. If you're an optimist and you believe that the world will slowly shift away from fossil fuels, but to do this, then costs of renewables need to come down. So I think in the long term, looking over 20 or 30 years, yes, China's international engagement with fossil fuels will reduce in proportion to its engagement in hydro, solar, wind, and nuclear power.
So it depends on the global trend, it seems like.
Yes. Asia is a very big region. Most of the people in the world live in Greater Asia. So yes, Asia is part of the world trend, not independent from it.
With that, thank you very much, Dr. Philip.
And a pleasure. Thank you very much, Arlene.